We're going to get into Daniel 12 tonight. But in order to get into Daniel 12, we have to back up to the end of chapter 11. So what I'd like us to do tonight is to read 11:40 through 12:4. And if you can tolerate it, I'll just read. From the New Revised Standard Version. And keep in mind that, you know, in verse 40, we're already at the tail end of a long section talking about the ascendancy of the king of the north. And so here we go. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him. So the king of the south attacks the king of the north again. But the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen, and with many ships. He shall advance against countries and pass through like a flood. He shall come into the beautiful land, and tens of thousands shall fall victim. But Edom and Moab and the main part of the Ammonites shall escape from his power. So let's keep in mind that Edom, Moab, and the Ammonites are east of the Jordan River and east of the Dead Sea. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and of silver and all the riches of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall follow in his train. But reports from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to bring ruin and complete destruction to many. He shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end with no one to help him. At that time, Michael, the great prince, the protector of your people, shall arise. There shall be a time of anguish, such as has never occurred since nations first came into existence. But at that time, your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky, and those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, keep the words secret and the book sealed until the time of the end. Many shall be running back and forth, and evil shall increase. All right, that's my New Revised Standard. Were there any words that, as I read, your version used something kind of noticeably different that you want to mention? Anything?
Yes, I have the MacArthur Study Bible, and I think it's an NIV. I can't remember. Anyway, that last line you read where you said many shall run and evil shall increase. Mine says knowledge shall increase.
Okay. Yeah, I have a footnote. The New Revised Standard, a footnote that says or knowledge, Hebrew knowledge, and so the translators of the New Revised Standard Version are following another set of sources, and I'm not sure why. It doesn't say why, it just notes that. So, okay, good. I was wondering about that. Any other words?
Well, the NIV in verse 43 referencing Nubians instead of, I think,
Ethiopians,
Yeah.
yeah, that's another footnote that, yeah. Nubians or
Cushites.
Cushites, right,
That's what mine has.
right. Okay. All right, so what we are getting,
Oops, sorry. Having it read to me.
what we are getting here
You're being on your own screen.
My techie is.
Are you got, Forrest and Sandy, are you having technical trouble?
Yeah, I had a screen up in front and he knows how to get rid of it.
Okay.
All right, so this section that we read is the wrap up of the prediction of what is to come. So one of the big questions about the book of Daniel is, when we read Daniel, are we reading in these last three chapters, 10, 11, and 12, are we reading about current circumstances? Or are we reading about some future set of circumstances?
Does it have to be an or?
Doesn't have to be an or. But I think for basic understanding, you have to kind of get yourself, you gotta, as much as you can, pinpoint, and then you can work out from there. Once you think you have a kind of starting place, you can work out. All right, so let me ask you a question. It says in my version, at the time of the end, that's 1140, as I say on this, we show on the screen here. Until the end of the end of verse 4. How much time do you have the sense is passing? Or I could ask this another way, what is taking place?
Well, it's continual warfare, including the beautiful land.
Uh-huh.
People are being born. People are dying. Michael is protecting some people. Not sure who, but
Right.
more people. But that's a long time.
Yeah, it looks like a season of time of some length. We don't really know how long, we don't, I mean, there have been these references to the times, times, half a time, things like that. And the scholars that I've been following have, sort of located it in the 160s BC. So is that, but it's not, at that time can be a while, right? It's not just like within a week or 2 weeks or even a month. There's a span of time here that we're talking about. These things are taking place. Now in chapter 12, verse 1, my version says a time of anguish. I looked at the NIV and several other versions. There were several versions that use the word distress, a time of distress. Is there another word that your version used?
Trouble.
Trouble, yeah. I think the King James Version uses trouble, so okay, any other words? Okay, let's take a second and a minute and describe the time of anguish. What does it say about this time of anguish?
It's worse than it's ever been before.
Right. Now, this can be a kind of a figure of speech, right? Or it can be indicating some sort of unprecedented season of trouble. How do you read that? How does it seem to you just as you look at these verses?
It seems to me it will be trouble except for those who are his people, or however you want to describe that. Because it say that at that time your people will be delivered.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't be trouble, would it? Maybe.
Well, or it may be that they are in that time of trouble, they are delivered. So it might be that they experience trouble to some degree. Again, this is where having some sort of sense about historical reference or future reference. If we look at the historical side, we know that the people living in Judea are undergoing trouble because Antiochus IV has really caused trouble. And, some of them have been killed, they're torture, killing, all that has gone on. But it's not just completely out of the question, certainly, that maybe somehow they're rescued, delivered before this time of trouble gets to its worst.
Well, MacArthur kind of indicates it's referring to the final tribulation.
Yeah, okay, so this is really good,
So
Linda.
as a
Using-
prophecy,
This is John MacArthur, right? You're using, so these are
Yeah,
John
it's that-
MacArthur's notes?
yeah, it's the study Bible. Had it for years and years.
Yeah, sure. I think John MacArthur is a dispensationalist.
Yes.
So he's giving us that, his interpretive filter then is these things are to happen yet far in the future. Not, he's reading Daniel with what they call a futurist view of history. So these things are gonna happen in the tribulation. We'll come back to this point when I get to the dispensationalist understanding of these verses. Okay. Verse
Seems-
2, yeah,
I'm gonna say
Go
that
ahead.
seems to me, there's many eras in history where people could have thought that's where they were because things were so bad, World War II and the Hitler era and just many things like that. So
right. Yeah, if you think about, again, I'm kind of letting the cat out of the bag, but talking about the various millennial views. So the word millennium relates to the 1,000-year reign that we find in the book of Revelation. And so that people have different millennial views. One of those millennial views is pre-millennialism, where Christ returns at the beginning of the 1,000-year reign. One is post-millennial, which is Christ returns at the end of the 1,000-year reign. And the 1,000 years is understood roughly in a literal way. The amillennial view sees the millennium in Revelation as a symbol and not to be taken literally. And amillennialists still believe in the return of Christ. They just don't think the millennium described in Revelation is a literal 1,000-year reign. So you've got three basic views of the end. And the reference to the tribulation then is a 7-year period where things are really at their worst just before the return of Christ and the establishment of the 1,000-year reign. Now, I was going to say that in the 19th century, in the 1800s, the dominant millennial view was really post-millennialism. And if you think about our country, there's technological advance, there's improvement. We have the Civil War, we have trouble, bad things are happening, but there's this sense that, we can make things better. The temperance movement, the abolitionist movement, these were ways of making society better, more holy. And so, and part of the post-millennial view is that, that conditions will improve. People will come to Christ. Churches were growing. The Methodist Church was growing like crazy in the 19th century. People are coming to Christ. We're solving some of these technological problems. We're overcoming some of these societal problems. So post-millennialism in the 19th century was sort of the dominant view. Now, dispensationalism gets started in the first third of the 19th century, but it takes a good while to get a hold, especially in the United States. And what do we have? We have World War I, we have the stock market crash and the Depression, we have World War II. Now things look like they're really falling apart. And so in the dispensationalist view, things are going to get worse, leading to the tribulation where things are at their worst, and then Christ returns, and it's all so. All that to say, Deborah, that our historical circumstances very much affect the way we read these texts because they just seem so real to us. The texts seem to speak in such a specific way when we're in the middle of something. So, well, again, we'll get to that. I'm having a hard time not jumping the gun here. Okay, back to 12:1. Who are your people? Question.
Well, I would think that would be Daniel's people, which would be the Israelites, or the Jewish people.
And do you think it's all of them, all the Jews, or a subset of Jews?
Just the ones written in the book.
All right, now again, I may be getting ahead of myself, but look at it, chapter 11, verse 30. Oh, not right. This is where is it 10:30? No, it's not 10:30. Okay. We'll save that. I know I've got this on a slide someplace, so I'm just getting myself confused. We'll move on, and I think we'll pick up on that point again. All right, verse 2 of chapter 12. Here we have the first inkling of the resurrection. And this really isn't the full-blown doctrine of the resurrection, but it is the first glimpse of resurrection in the Bible. And the Pharisees pick up on this and really, you might say, develop the idea and sort of build a doctrine of the resurrection, which Jesus shares with the Pharisees, and they disagree with the Sadducees who don't believe in the resurrection. So again, that's an intra-Jewish discussion. So some will be raised to everlasting life, some to everlasting shame and contempt. Now, we've already started talking about these last two questions. Are we looking at end times predictions here? Or are we looking at the prediction of how closer historical events will turn out? Is Daniel talking about his period of time? So he's reading scripture. Remember, he's gone back and looked at Jeremiah. He's reading scripture and thinking about these events in light of scripture.
Steve,
Yeah, Jim.
is this the first time that the concept of names written in a book has been written about in the scriptures, or are there other spots?
That is a very good question, and the short answer is no. This idea of names written in a book, I'm going on bad memory here. Let's try Psalm 6. Nope. Okay. Well, I do know that there are earlier references to names written in the book. So somebody maybe could.
Psalm 9, maybe?
Is it Psalm 9?
No, this talks about blotting out the name, which implies.
I've got a verse kind of rattling around in my head. Well, let's keep going, and maybe that verse will surface. But the short answer to your question is no. So names written in a book is an idea that has shown up several places in the Old Testament already. Good question. Okay, now it's easy to do the kind of both and thing, but we need a toehold. Saying it can mean both. It can mean in times predictions, far off into the future. It can mean closer to our time right now. But that doesn't help us a lot get some footing for how we understand Daniel. What I'm trying to say is, if you have a starting point, you can kind of be, this is where I am, and then you can roam around and see these other options and kind of figure out what you think is the best option. But if I just start out saying, well, it means this and it means that, then it's kind of, things get mushy, I think, in our understanding. So based on how we've been studying the book of Daniel, which of those do you think seems more likely? You can change your mind 10 minutes from now, I don't care. Yeah,
Well, the way that we have looked at it in the context of which Daniel was written, it would seem as if it was contemporary more to pre-Christ time in Daniel.
Right.
His people,
yeah,
but that's also, we'll talk about it later.
okay, all right, that's good, yeah,
And that's-
yeah.
I think the verse you were looking for is Psalm 69. Where'd it go? Where, 69:28, where may they be blotted out of the book of life.
That's 169:28,
Yeah.
Jim.
Yeah.
Psalm 69:28,
It's a negative connotation.
yeah.
But-
Yeah, let them be blotted out of the book of the living, yeah. Good, okay. Yeah, I think,
So Steve, does history past Daniel's time bear out that this was a prediction for the time? Is that actually what happened to the Israelites
they
in the
were
next
delivered.
several generations?
They were delivered, and this is where the scholars start to kind of part company in their opinions about how to read this, but the Jews were delivered by the Maccabees in the 160s. Antiochus IV died in 164. And they rise up and they cleanse the temple. The priesthood has been compromised by accommodation to the Greek influences, including from Antiochus. Those priests are thrown out. It's a pretty violent kind of revolution, but you know, from the standpoint of Daniel, holiness is reestablished in the 160s. It really takes a while. Reestablished is probably not the right word. The Maccabees start winning battles, and I think around in the 130s or so is when they really establish a Jewish state that looks like what they think Yahweh's people should look like. And that lasts until the Romans overthrow that area in 63. So for about, what is that? 60 or so years, 60 to 70 years, they live as a free people.
But still, we have twice here, the time of the end.
Yeah. Yeah, and so the question is, time of the end, is the time, is the end the far distant end, like the final end? Or is the time of the end referring to the end of this particular era or epoch? Right, that's, and there's no way that we can definitively say, yes, it's this, and it clearly is not that. Now, maybe a few things we could say it's not that, but it's, this is the kind of language we're dealing with here, sort of literature. This is in some ways not very satisfying, but it probably is edifying. Okay, let me move on.
Now, when it says until the end of time,
Is that?
Does yours say end of time or time of the end?
sealed until the time of the end.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, verse 4. Keep the words secret and the book sealed until the time of the end. So look at
That's
verse 9.
10 also. 9, I guess.
Yeah. Right. The words are to remain secret and sealed until the time of the end. And back in 8:26. Let's look at 8:26.
Many days from now? Many days?
Mine says the distant future.
Right. As for you, seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. Again, many, what do we, what, how, can we come up with a time frame? But this is, I want to point this out because here we have, a linguistic connection. So when we read chapter 12, we've read chapter 8, and if we've really studied it closely, our minds are going to go, oh, we've read this phrase before, right? So then we go back to where we find we've read it before, and we look at that passage, that context, and we look for the links between chapter 8 and chapter 12 relative to the time of the end. And it just starts to kind of fill in the understanding a little bit, just a little bit. We could read this 10 more times, and start to gain deeper insight, I would think.
Hey, Steve,
Yeah,
I'm having a hard time understanding what purpose is served by sealing it up and keeping it sealed until the end of time.
yeah,
And oops,
what?
well, it's not sealed. Like, we're reading it.
You may not have that.
We
All
don't
right.
have all the information.
Yeah, go ahead, Sandy.
We don't have all the information. I think whatever's sealed, we don't know about.
Okay, okay,
That's how I see it.
okay,
Okay, so there's still
okay, more to the
more to
story.
be revealed.
Yeah.
Which I think that's true.
Okay,
One way of looking at,
It could be Daniel's death, the end of his days, his time.
right,
that's,
or it could be that the circumstances as they unfold reveal what was in Daniel's vision, right? As the circumstances play out, that's where the revelation is. It's not like we're gonna open a literal book and, oh, there it is, right? It's that Daniel's vision is known, and then the outcome of that vision isn't known. That's the part that's sealed until circumstances reveal their truthfulness.
Is that
But-
similar to
Yeah.
the concept of in the New Testament with the disciples that Jesus is doing these miracles and he tells them to keep it quiet until the time comes that they will fully understand or grasp what's going on?
Right, exactly, yeah.
Okay.
But the question is still with Daniel, especially with Daniel, is where is that time, right? Is it a little closer to where we've been with, all the history that we've been talking about, or is it way out into the future yet? And we're gonna talk about that.
You want to talk about Revelation 5? There you go, got it.
Okay, when is the end? So let's look at Revelation 5.
I thought we weren't supposed to ever know that.
Yeah, no one knows it.
And we're not supposed to know it.
Right, so I think what we're talking about, we don't know when the end is, but we know that it will come about according to God's plan.
Right.
okay.
Okay. Revelation 5, verse 5, and then verse 9. Okay, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, he's gonna break the seals on this book. So again, one view of prophecy, one view of history is that book is sealed until the risen Lord in the end, at the end, opens this book and reveals what's in it. Verse 5, and then verse 9. You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals. So, let's keep in mind seals. So a really fancy scroll would have like a clasp and maybe more than one clasp. A not so fancy scroll would have wax or something to keep it, you roll it up and then you seal it by that last fold, wherever that last fold is, you stick it shut that way. And those are the seals that the Lion of the tribe of Judah will break, which signifies this kind of progressive opening of the secrets in that book. Now, again, the questions. Do we have here, and I'm using the word chain on purpose. Have any of you ever used the Thompson Chain Reference Bible? Okay, that chain reference system does this. It takes a word like seal, and it shows where that word is used all through the Bible, and it looks for linguistic connections. So this verse in this part of the Bible, this verse in this part of the Bible, according to God's sovereign oversight, they have a connection. Those verses have a connection, and we are meant to get that connection. That's part of God's revelation to us. Now that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is, again, forgive me for frustrating everybody, but another way of looking at it is seal here is like a metaphor. It's part of a stock of ways of saying things. And the metaphor is used here, and then for some other reason, the metaphor is used here, and they don't necessarily have the same kind of linked together meaning connection that the chain idea would have. Now that doesn't, I'm not saying that they have no connection, right? Because there's just sort of this natural, oh, I find the word here, I find the same word there. I do this all the time. You know, you just wonder, but then that's recognizing that it's a metaphor that was part of a stock, you might say, of terms that writers could draw upon for various purposes. Just keeping that in mind maybe helps me not overinterpret any given text or set of texts. Okay, I saw that. What is that? What do you think?
No, I'm following what you say. It's just hard for the average Joe to know when to use what rule and when to use the next.
Aha, yes, true. It's hard for the not so average Joe.
Okay.
But everybody can work at it and practice, and the average Joe can get better, and so can the expert.
But the other thing though, in terms of the chain,
Yeah,
this in Daniel 12 and Revelation 5 and following talks about the seal of the scroll. There's other seals and people are sealed with the Holy Spirit and
yeah.
that kind of thing.
yeah,
But this is a specific
right.
symbol, if you will, a picture. It is
Absolutely.
a specific thing
Yeah,
that is then repeated in the Revelation.
right, right. Yeah, it's a very fetching kind of connection.
And one is a book and the other is a scroll.
That, I don't think that's a major difference. Because we don't have, especially in the day of Daniel, we don't have the codex. We don't have books that are made like what we use. They were all scrolls or.
Yeah, but why the word book then? Like,
Yeah, good question.
why isn't it a scroll?
I don't know.
Mine, does yours not say scroll?
No, mine says, I mean, in Revelation, it says scroll.
Right,
But in Daniel, it says book.
in mine, in Daniel, it says scroll,
Oh, does it? Okay.
verse 4, the words of the scroll.
Yeah, that very well could be an interpretive decision that the English interpreter, translators did.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's go back to Daniel,
Well, one
Yeah.
more point,
okay?
not to belabor it, but the other thing that is consistent between the two pericopes, if you will, is you have this notion in Daniel 12 about the resurrection, the multitudes will rise. That is also in the context, in a broader context of the Revelation. We have the names written in the book of life.
Right.
In the Revelation. So
Absolutely,
there's a lot of
a lot of connections.
both in, yeah.
Okay, I think this is what I'm trying to get us to think about. So from the perspective of Daniel, when Daniel is seeing this vision, does Daniel have any sense about what's happening in Revelation? It's clear that the writer of Revelation knows Daniel, right? And he is pulling forward into the present these images from Daniel because he sees them now unfolding in his time, right? So that's what so we don't necessarily, I think you don't necessarily need Daniel to be able to see that far distant future to even though we can see from the writer of Revelation's perspective that he's pulling from the past into the present.
Well, and not to belabor another point, but Daniel's, John or whoever the writer of the Revelation is, those are visions given by Jesus
Yes,
directly to him.
Right.
Write this, now you write this, what I'm showing you.
right, right.
Straight from Jesus. John or whoever you want to say
Yeah.
wrote it,
Yep,
was doing directly from there.
right,
So he's kind of a scribe, if you will, trying to write down the visions that he's being given
right.
with the words.
And that may, again, trying to sort of fill out my thought here. So, okay, Daniel didn't see the whole picture.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that it's going that direction, right? Daniel sees this little bit, but it's on a trajectory toward what we see in the book of Revelation, right? And that's where the linkage is made. Now, I want to maybe not belabor this point, but if you go back to Daniel 12, look at verse 4, look at verse 9, and then look at 8:26. So again, we're talking about the book being sealed, and then 8:26. Oh, we've really already done this. I'm sorry, I'm just kind of repeating. But again, so those chapter 8 and chapter 12 have this linguistic connection that would prompt us to spend time looking for, okay, what are we learning in chapter 8? What are we learning in chapter 12? And how do they work together? Okay,
Did you say that chapter 8 was written in Greek and the 12 was in Hebrew? I'm way back.
it's Hebrew and Aramaic.
Oh,
So
okay.
chapter 1, let's see, which are the Aramaic verses? The Aramaic
That's
chapter.
okay.
I think it's 2 through 6, if I remember
Okay.
correctly, but I'm blanking right now. Maybe 2 through 7. But chapter 8, I'm pretty sure is back in Hebrew.
Okay.
Okay, let's do the same with chapter 11, verses 21 through 25. Just look at the content. Verse 32 in chapter 11. Verses 43 and 44 in chapter 11. And then we could go back to previous chapters and see references to. No, I didn't do it. References, we get similar descriptions of that person, right? So a similar kind of thing, we see these words used, these descriptions given here, we see them here. And even though the way the book is written, it's like time has passed, it may be a different kingdom now, but the similarity of description of these two beasts or whatever it is, nation, king, causes us to notice and think. Again, we're not getting a lot of conclusions. I'm just trying to show us what we need to notice a little bit, just try to illustrate. Okay, 12:11. From the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination that desolates is set up. Okay, that sounds like a very specific kind of event in history. So we would go looking around, where do we find something like that happening. This is why the scholars always go to Antiochus the Fourth, because it just fits so well historically. Look at 8:11-13. He overthrew the place of his sanctuary. Because of wickedness, the host was given over to it together with the regular burnt offering. So in 12:11, we could say that's a reference back to what we read in chapter 8. Similarly, chapter 12, verse 12. Happy are those who persevere and attain the 1,335 days. Look at 8:14. Okay, now it's not the same number, but it's still this.
But it's this here, mine says evenings and mornings.
Yeah.
So twice what the number. in
Right. Right.
12.
And that's, these numbers, they don't work perfectly. They don't fit together hand in glove like pieces of a puzzle. They are impressionistic, I think, in that sense. But again, if we're just reading through the book, we read this in chapter 8, we read it again in chapter 12. Okay, what is this book telling us? Right? We notice these connections and then we work on figuring out what it's telling us. Okay, so to try to wrap up Daniel as a whole, and then I want to get to the specific kind of dispensationalist part. The themes in Daniel: faithfulness to Yahweh and the courage to resist. So we get that very clearly. Daniel and his friends, how they will not accommodate their beliefs and practices to the pagan culture. We get Yahweh protecting the faithful all the way through this book. The 3 men thrown into the fiery furnace, Daniel thrown into the lion's den. We get Yahweh is sovereign over all the nations. For example, in chapter 2, these 4 kingdoms, we're going to have these 4 kingdoms, but eventually they collapse, right? Nebuchadnezzar's other dream. So chapter 2 is his one dream. The other dream is what?
Is it the statue with the golden?
No, that's chapter 2.
Oh, that's the 2.
Chapter 4 is, isn't it this is where he loses his mind, right? He's taken down a notch or two for a while, right? And then Belshazzar in chapter 5, this is the handwriting on the wall. And at the end of that chapter, he dies. So Daniel shows us God's power, God's goodness, his faithfulness to his people. There's no nation that can stand up to God's purposes. So stay faithful. You got to have courage. There will be danger, there will be difficulty, but God is faithful. That's kind of the sort of the major themes in the book. Now, interpreting the present in light of Scripture. So again, if you look at chapter 7, we have the 4th beast. If you look at chapter 8, the little horn there is like the 4th beast. It's like more description of the same thing. And then chapter 11, it's the 4th king. So again, we have similarity in motifs, you might say, descriptions. And I think we are meant to recognize those connections and then try to figure out, okay, what is the approach of the book of Daniel for us to get the point. Again, these are just impressions that we pick up, things we notice by just paying attention to the details. All right, the numbers.
Now the numbers.
What I've been trying to avoid for several weeks. Daniel 7:25 and Daniel 12:7, we find a time, times or 2 times and half a time. Now, I think the vast majority of scholars, whether they're dispensationalist or not, they think that's an impressionistic way of talking about somewhere around 3.5 years. Daniel 8:14. 2,300 evenings and mornings. You divide that in 2, what do you get?
Oh, 1,150.
1,150, right? 1,150 days. That's 3.15 years. So it's not 3.5 years. But again, you know, just sort of taking at face value, it looks like we're talking about roughly a 3-year period. So again, we go back to that passage and kind of get a sense of what's going on there. We're looking at some sort of 3-year period where these things are happening, and there's going to be some kind of resolution to those things. All right, now there are other numbers in the book of Daniel, but they're, you know, like the 21 days, the 24 days, and a number of chronological references that we've sort of covered that ground. So now let me finish up with, I'm going to give you the dispensationalist foundational passage in the book of Daniel. So now, Daniel 9:24-27.
Hey, Steve,
Yes,
maybe you need to explain what you mean when you say dispensation.
I'm going to do that. Yes,
Okay.
I shall.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's read the verses. 70 weeks are decreed for your people and your holy city, Jerusalem, to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin. Notice the language here, to put an end to sin. Is that to put an end to sin in that period of time that we're talking about? Or is this the final decisive put an end to sin? That's the question. And to atone for iniquity, same question. To bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, and to anoint a most holy place. Know therefore and understand, from the time that the word went out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Okay, there's a reference to a historical event. Until the time of an anointed prince, there shall be 7 weeks. And for 62 weeks, it shall be built again with streets and mowed the city, but in a troubled time. You can read about that troubled time in the book of Nehemiah, for example. In a troubled time. After the 62 weeks, an anointed one. Anointed one in Hebrew is Messiah. I mean, that's our English version. Mashiach. That's the word used here. Anointed one, a Messiah, shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the troops of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. Okay, dispensationalism. I'm using the word, there have been dispensationalist views all through church history. A dispensation is a period of time in which God is understood to act in a particular way. And the people of God during that period of time are supposed to act accordingly. And the problem is they don't. So then another period of time ensues in which God acts differently. And from this kind of modern dispensationalist perspective, there are 7 of these periods of time, dispensations. There's the age of Abraham, there's the age of Moses, the age of the law, there's the age of grace, there's, you know, things like that. Now, here's where it gets really tricky. And this, what I'm telling you about now has been developed from the writings of a guy named John Nelson Darby, was a Brethren pastor in the 1830s and 40s. And it really caught on in the early 20th century in the United States. This view, it is a view of history. And the idea is that when we read biblical prophecy, when we're reading about Israel, it's really meant just for Israel. So the people of God, when we're reading these prophecies in the Old Testament, the people of God does not include Christians coming in the future. The dispensationalist view, the classic dispensationalist view, has two peoples of God. There's the people of God, Israel, and the people of God, followers of Jesus. Now, that's the classic view, and they have two histories. And this is where the weeks come into play here. God's people, Israel, and God's people, the church, have two histories. Okay? Now, that's the classical view. There's a what's known as the progressive dispensationalist view, where that distinction is not so hard and fast. And we don't have time to get into that. So classical dispensationalism here, that really drives, the vision behind the Left Behind series, or those of you who read The Late Great Planet Earth back in the 70s, like I did, this is the classic dispensationalist view. C.I. Scofield, Charles Ryrie, Dallas Theological Seminary, this was what they taught. Okay, 70 weeks. Now, the week here is a week of years. So 70 weeks of years is how many years?
490?
490 years. Okay, so now we go back to 9:24 through 27. We see that $490 years. This is just hard to describe quickly. And now I'm feeling time pressure, I'm sorry. So we have 490 years total. Now we go to figuring out, when was the decree issued to start restoring the holy city?
When Darius wasn't, or Cyrus.
Okay,
Cyrus.
So this is where it gets tricky. Cyrus is one of the choices, but the dispensationalists don't believe it's Cyrus.
Okay.
They really believe it's Artaxerxes. That's when Nehemiah goes back to Jerusalem to start the rebuilding process. And that's in 445 or 444 BC. Okay, so that's kind of our beginning historical reference point. So we've got 490 years to work with, starting from the 440s.
How convenient.
BC. Okay, now, this is where it really gets complicated. So in verse 25, until the time of an anointed prince, there shall be 7 weeks, and for 62 weeks it shall be built again with streets and moat, etc. So 7 weeks plus 62 weeks is 69 weeks of years. Here's the linchpin for this classic dispensationalist view. 69 weeks of years. If you understand a Babylonian year to be 360 days instead of 365 days, 69 weeks of years winds up to be right at the time of Jesus' crucifixion. So an anointed one shall be cut off. They read this, so they're saying Daniel is really about Jesus' death on the cross, and that the numbers here, the weeks of years and all that, work out to be that period of time. Now, again, a Babylonian year is 360 days, not 365. We're sort of working with numbers in a way to kind of make it turn out right. Because if you take 365 days for a year, you know, the anointed one being cut off would then be 39 AD, not 33 AD, and that sort of thing. So it gets, and that's why other scholars say this is why dispensationalism doesn't work, because you can't really pin down the numbers very well. So, okay, just to try to kind of put it all on a little package here. So we have a total of 490 years, according to Daniel 9. And we have a portion of that time divided for the reestablishment of Israel. And that's everything that's going on. All this stuff we've been reading about. You know, you go to the other prophets, the Jews are allowed to return to Israel and reestablish their nation and, rebuild the temple and do all that. That's going to take all these centuries. And that's about 69 weeks of years it takes. Okay, now remember it said 70. So here's what happens. When Jesus dies and is resurrected, the age of the church begins. The dispensation of the church begins. And this prophetic clock for Israel stops. So Israel right now is at the 69th year. 69th week, excuse me. The 70th week is the age of, we have this parenthesis period of time. The clock has stopped at 69. The church age is happening now. What starts the 70th week?
Pentecost.
Tribulation. The tribulation starts the 70th week. Now, I don't have time to talk about this. I got to stop. But this is where the idea of the rapture of the church is brought in. So the church, according to a dispensationalist view, will be raptured out of the world. The 7-year tribulation will start. Some say the church is raptured halfway through that 7-year tribulation. But basically, so that's when the prophetic clock for Israel starts again. So it's during the tribulation that God's people, the Jews, will start returning to God through Christ, their Messiah. They start to recognize Christ as their Messiah. Now, this is one reason, and I feel like I've done a terrible job explaining this, but it's one reason why so many, to use this language, conservative evangelical Christians of this, with this kind of end times view. It's why they're so supportive of Israel, right? Because Israel is God's people. Now they know that not everything about Israel is God's people. They know that, but still, the fact that Israel was reconstituted as a nation in 1948 is hugely important in this view. And so these things all get tied together, and it's part of what drives our politics in ways that are kind of visible to us, but a lot of this remains completely hidden. But that's how these numbers work out from a dispensationalist point of view, and that Daniel 9, 24 through 27 is really key. And I have a one-page kind of summary of this stuff that I'd be glad to share with you if you would find it helpful. Now, I'm not a dispensationalist, but I mean, this is it's a very compelling, kind of logically worked out system, as long as you accept how they work with numbers, right? These numbers that, a few of them I've tried to share with you a little bit. So that's it. Okay.
Those numbers are ordinal numbers. That means 12 means, 10 means.
Yeah. Yep.
I always wonder how they can say those numbers work when at their time they didn't even have those numbers. I mean, even the Romans could only count to 1,000. They couldn't count any further than that because they didn't have numbers for anything other than that.
Didn't know that.
They had,
I did not know that.
they had numbers.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm not,
sorry.
they didn't have the,
They had, math was.
yeah.
Pythagoras
Right.
before Romans.
As a math teacher,
Yeah, Roman
yes.
numerals, be hard to do that in Roman numerals, right? Who's the math teacher? Deborah?
as a
Yeah, but-
math teacher, numbers are the smallest part of math. Concepts are the biggest part of math.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
definitely would have the concept of what that is, whether they have a way of writing it down or not.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, I wish I would have understood that back when I was in high school, Deborah. It would have helped me a lot with
I tutor.
geometry especially.
Not my job, but I tutor math, so.
All right, well, I think we're done with Daniel, or maybe Daniel's done with us for a little bit. Hopefully it's not too confusing. I think what I would like to, I've been trying to show that interpretation is necessary. We have to draw conclusions, gotta land someplace. But with this kind of writing, these visionary writings, I think it's important that we hold our conclusions somewhat loosely, and they're always open to modification. But I think we can say with confidence, God isn't surprised by human historical events, and God is not limited. We can trust God who is sovereign. We just need to be faithful. I think that's really important for us to hold on to. Okay, gang.
So will we send an email out about next week?
And by we,
Me?
you mean-
Will I be sending out an email?
yes, you will.
And are
Yes,
you
you-
going to attach your sheet of explanation or whatever it was you
Yeah,
just
we have
mentioned?
your email addresses, so we'll
We
attach,
can do it.
we'll attach this one sheet
Yeah.
summary I had.
Yeah.
All
And then
right,
also, I learned anything at all over these past weeks.
yeah, the sheet I'm sending is just about dispensationalism. It's not about Daniel. It's just about what I tried to say.
Oh dear.
Yeah, okay, good deal. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.